It is not copy-paste or copying someone else's scholarship. I personally have experience because I used to go there, fund them, and keep an eye on what they're up to. So I used to read all the dissertations that came out of Harvard concerning India, whether it's religion, political science, history, social science, anthropology, all of that I used to read. And I found that there's a huge bias there. And this bias has been going on. It's nothing to do with the Modi government. This bias was there for a long time.
Welcome to Indus University. We are very, very proud to have you with us here today, and welcome to Ahmedabad.
So I'm delighted to be here. I've been here many times. I've always enjoyed. I've enjoyed the hospitality, the wonderful university, and yesterday we had a great event launching this book.
Today, I would like to ask you a lot of questions in terms of how you can help the youth understand what has been written in this book and to educate and enlighten them about snakes in the Ganga.
Wonderful. So I always like young people questioning me. Serious things are happening in this world and they need to understand so that you can navigate. You can experience things that are happening around you, make sense out of it. You can know how to respond, when to detect some threat or danger, how to deal with it. So that's what this book is for.
It is a very, very interesting name that we have over here, Snakes in the Ganga. Would you please enlighten us why this name has been chosen by you?
Sure. So we want to tell people, this is a metaphor, we want to tell people that where you least expect, there is danger. Where it's beneath the surface, you don't see it. And these are the snakes are a metaphor for individuals who are like that, institutions, and ideas. Idea can be a snake. So that's what the term implies.
Right. As a youngster, when I read the name Snakes in the Ganga, I think it is trying to communicate something very, very alarming with what is happening in India.
So the byline, Breaking India 2.0, tells you that there's something alarming. That makes it very clear.
Right.
Because there was a previous book called Breaking India.
Right.
So now this is the second level of Breaking India. And that talked about how there are foreign forces combined with internal forces, and these are breaking India. And they included things like missionaries converting people and taking them away from their culture. The Dravidianism, saying that these North Indian Aryans are opposed to you, infighting, creating infighting, bhed or fragmentation among Indians. Now we are finding that this breaking up of India has taken a new level. The players are different. And it is no longer a project for trying to break up people at the grassroots who are poor villagers by converting them. This is a project at the top level of government, top level of industry, top level of elite young people who are in technology. So it's the top of the pyramid of power structure and elitism in India, which is being attacked, hijacked, distorted, co-opted for breaking India. So it's a top-down process of breaking India rather than a bottom-up from the grassroots. That's very different. And the people doing it overseas are new and different people than the ones in the previous case. And the type of Indians who are involved, collaborating, are very different. So it requires an entirely different treatment. It's not the same thing as the past.
So if you would like to elaborate more on the methodology of how these systems are working.
So you see, what is happening is there are new theories that have come about. These theories are different than just the Dravidianism theory, the old Christian Hindu kind of a conversion theory. Now they're talking about breaking India through social, creating bhed, creating animosity among communities, for instance, caste, for instance, minorities, for instance, LGBTQ, for instance, women. So the idea being to find people in groups that have some grievances. There's a whole field called grievance studies, which encourages people who have grievances. And so then they make groups of these people, and then they apply Marxism, which says that the oppressed people need to fight the oppressor. And in this case, oppressor is India and ancient Indian structures and Vedic structures, Hinduism, those are the oppressors. So the idea being that if you are in trouble for whatever reason, you don't have jobs or economically you're disempowered or whatever, you blame it on Indian society, Indian civilization, and you fight it. And so the theory basically groups such people, clubs such people together as the oppressed, tries to empower them in a kind of a revolutionary sense, and it can turn violent. So now you see a lot of violence in India, a lot of problems when the government tries to enact something about Article 370 or CAA or any of these farm laws. You see foreign intervention to kind of take sides with those who are unresting and call it like social justice. So this social justice movement and human rights movement is a way to intervene in India's fabric of society and try to break it down. And these are coming from places like Harvard, because it's a very elite university. It's a think tank of the ultra left, extreme left, and they are creating the ideologies. They are creating the individuals who are trained in this, and then they're sent back to India. Some of them go to Washington Post, New York Times. They work in the think tanks in America, think tanks in India. They work in the UN. They work in the US Congress. So they work in all sorts of powerful institutions in the United States, in India, and elsewhere. So Harvard has that kind of a clout, and it is supplying the thinkers of this ideology and putting them all over in every kind of institution, including corporate institution. And therefore, the Breaking India 2.0 is far more dangerous because it's so widespread and it is backed by the brand name and credibility of Harvard University.
You have mentioned Harvard University as the global nexus, which is producing Breaking India poison. Why Harvard?
So, you know, Harvard is so powerful. It sees itself as the Vishva-Guru, what we would call Vishva-Guru, the guru to the world. We think India is the Vishwa-Guru, but Harvard thinks they are the Vishwa-Guru because they're training presidents, prime ministers all over the world. They're training senators, congressmen, influencing the next generation of thinkers. They're taking the kids of Indian, government people, military people, national security people, industry people, media people. They're taking the sons and daughters and reorienting them, rewiring them into their way of thinking. So it's a very powerful thing. Now, an ordinary university wouldn't be able to do that because they don't have the clout. Nobody wants to go to some ordinary place, but everybody will flock to Harvard, And so, because they are a magnet that can attract all the people of the world, there's dozens of applications for everyone who's selected. So they can use this power to their advantage. Now, in the British era, it used to be Oxford. Oxford was the university figuring out India, coming up with theories on India, training the East India Company officers, taking that knowledge into other universities all over Europe, and the knowledge was brought to Indian universities and spread from there. The Babus in India were trained by British people who were trained in Oxford. So all of that kind of role has shifted to Harvard. So therefore, if we want to critique, we could have picked up some small university. So it's not that Harvard is the only place. Harvard is the biggest place. So you have to take on the big place to make your case.
In your previous book, you have mentioned the term intellectual Kshatriya.
Yes.
Because now it is time for the youth to get empowered with that kind of knowledge, because we have moved on from different kinds of wars. First, it was physical wars, and we witnessed bio wars as well. But now it is about the youth gaining all the knowledge from what you have written and becoming intellectual Kshatriya, so to counteract what is happening. So if I may ask, with all that you have mentioned regarding what is happening in Harvard University, how is it impacting the Indians who are living in America, and what is the impact for them?
So, Harvard has, one of the things they've done is attack IITs. There's a Harvard professor, Ajanta Subramaniam, who's come up with a book that says the IITs are basically casteist and racist. And it's basically a structure of upper caste people oppressing Dalits. Okay, and so that's pretty serious allegation. And this has resulted in another organization called Equality Labs doing surveys in America, phony surveys, fake surveys, but surveys that are creating a sensation, saying that most of the good jobs are on a systematic way, they are with Brahmins, and they control these tech industries in Silicon Valley and elsewhere in the United States. And the Dalits are oppressed, and they're not given jobs, and they don't get promotions and things of that sort. Even the H-1B visa, the allegation is made that it is biased towards upper caste. There's some kind of a caste bias going on. So this is affecting Indians because now Indians in the tech space are suspect that you must be a racist. Because if you're casteist, then the other thing that has come about is mapping that caste is race. And so if you are considered casteist, then you are racist. And if you're racist, there are American laws that should be applied to prosecute you. So there are now legal cases in California. There's one against the Cisco, which is a big tech company, where some Brahmin was accused of bringing the caste system from India and practicing all this sort of stuff. So the upper caste are considered like white supremacists, and the lower caste are considered to be like blacks. And this racism of America, the slavery of America, is considered the lens through which to see Indian society. And this Indian society, according to them, has been brought into America and contaminated and kind of American society with all this stuff. So, you know, if you're an Indian, you're very proud of all the hard work you've done to go to this other country and work your way up through meritocracy. But Ajanta Subramaniam, the professor, in her book, she says that meritocracy itself is a sham. Meritocracy, the very concept of meritocracy, is basically a cover-up for caste elitism, caste privilege. So those who have caste privilege, rather than saying openly that, hey, I got caste privilege, they're saying I got merit. But it's not genuine. That's her view. So she challenges the concept of meritocracy. And she says this concept is anti-democracy. To be a democracy, you cannot have merit. What you need is quotas. So rather than evaluating people on merit, you got to give them quotas and bring people into jobs. So now they are trying to get this sort of quota in the Silicon Valley. And this will only be for Indians. There's no such thing being considered for other people. And so this is a bias against one religion, if you think about it. It's pretty serious. Now there are also counter lawsuits from our side saying that this violates the US Constitution. And we'll see what happens. But all this controversy is deliberate. And regardless of who wins one case or another case, the point is it spreads a bad image about Indians. It spreads it harms the brand value of IITs. Ironically, IITs haven't defended themselves. So in my book, I have a whole chapter on this IIT thing as an example, but the IITs themselves have not defended themselves. So I'm very concerned. And one of the things I want is IITians should stand up and speak out, respond, help me take this matter forward.
Why IITs?
So, there are many theories. One theory is that Harvard is jealous of IITs. Harvard used to produce all the CEOs, but now the Silicon Valley CEOs are mainly coming from IITs. And not just CEOs, but a lot of top people.
Yes.
And they're making a lot of money. They're taking over the whole, a lot of industry. And it's not just tech. Indians are doing well in pharma, Indians in all kinds of engineering, finance, medicine. So there is this jealousy factor that who are these people? They weren't around, these brown-skinned people weren't around 10, 15 years ago, and they've kind of invaded our country, taken all kind of jobs. So, what better way to hit back than call them casteist and racist and create a smear campaign against them. So there is that. Another reason is that the people in certain groups in India have gone to Harvard to complain. It's like in the old days, one Raja had a problem with his neighboring Raja, he would call the East India Company and file some complaint that they are violating this or that law in order to get the East India Company to help him. So this created divisiveness among the kings in India, and the British took over everybody. So now you have these Dalits, many Dalits have gone and collaborated with these Harvard-type professors and gotten their help. So it's both Harvard initiated and Indian people initiated who feel that they are being oppressed or they have a grievance against society.
How should their response be?
Well, IITs should first read this book to see what I've already said about the problem and my response. And then they should respond even further because they have the ground level experience, they have the data, and they can come up with statistics. Now, this attack on IIT by Ajanta Subramaniam, published by Harvard University Press, does not give any data. It just makes sweeping conclusions without any numbers, without any facts. They didn't go and get any statistics. So, it's just credibility of Harvard. It's just misusing and abusing, the Harvard credibility and clout so that you can get away with all these statements without having to prove your case.
Right, sir. Because what is happening right now, specifically with the caste system, and when we had the British invasion, we have seen how the caste system, how the Indians were divided. So, would you like to elaborate and connect with what happened previously to what is happening right now?
So previously, the British created today's version of caste system. There was Varna, there was Jati, but Lord Risley in the late 1800s started this census of India, and he brought in this idea of a hierarchy and frozen castes, whereas previously they were Jatis, fluid, and they were not in a hierarchy. They had various relationships. In one respect, a particular Jati was better off. In another respect, another Jati was better off, you know. So it wasn't one-dimensional frozen hierarchy of power like it became later. That's what they did. Now what is happening is the new system that the Americans are championing, it's also bringing in minority religions, it's bringing in LGBTQ, it's bringing in all kinds of people and saying that these are part of the oppressed class. And it's applying Marxism to break up India, essentially. At least intellectually break up India, emotionally break up India, and then at some point in time it turns violent and it becomes physical. So this is very much an American project. I mean, I like America, I live in America, I'm fond of it, I'm loyal to it, but I think there are some flaws in the US policy towards South Asia. And this is a serious US policy. It's harming American interests in India. It's harming US-India relations at a time when they should be friends, and the United States should respect India's democracy. One of the allegations being made through all of this is that India is a sham democracy, that India's democracy is not real, that it's a fascist country, and you know, Modi is considered to be a fascist, and anybody who speaks up as a Hindu, whether he's right or wrong doesn't matter, he's accused immediately. So a lot of Hindus don't want to assert their identity. A lot of them want to get into this, hide their identities, stay below the ceiling, you know, the glass ceiling, so to speak, and not be positive about saying, here's who we are, the way other faiths are able to do. So this is having a devastating effect today on the morale of Indians and on the status of India as a country at a time when India is doing well, at a time when the GDP is doing well, development-wise doing well, stature is increasing. This is kind of the counter movement to push back.
How do you think the youth of India should respond to this, and what is the skill set they should be developing to counteract this?
So first I want them to read this book. Don't be scared by the size of this book, because you need to read only the introduction, okay, 40 pages, and then go and read the one-page overview of every chapter. The chapter may be 30, 40 pages, but there's a one-page summary, and that's all you need to read. So in about less than 100 pages, you can understand everything the book is saying. The rest of the details are proof, evidence, examples. You don't need that. And then after you've got this bird's eye view of the whole book, you can decide what you want to read in more detail. So you don't have to read cover to cover. You can read one chapter and get a huge amount out of this. Like the whole IIT scandal, IIT controversy is one chapter. So like that, each chapter is a lot of information. And therefore, people should not be scared of the size of this book. You should get a copy, read whatever little you can, it'll empower you. And then once a person is empowered on even one topic in this book, then it'll change the way they think. It'll give them some confidence. They'll be able to debate with their friends, articulate their point of view. First of all, they'll be able to diagnose when somebody is saying something strange and not very good. Why is he saying it? Where did he get it from? Who taught him this? What are the jargon? What do these jargons mean? So it's a way to learn how to understand the current discourse and the way things are shaping for the next 10 years. My previous book, a dozen years ago, shaped the movements in this country for a decade. And so many people created their channels and they became writers and activists based on that book. This book is going to do the same for the next 10 years.
Thank you, sir. So in your book, you have written about breaking India. So can you please elaborate with how it is impacting the family structure and how it is affecting the youth currently?
So, you know, it's a very important point, because it's not just breaking India in the sense of attacking the government and all that. Suraj Yengde, who is one of the Harvard guys, poster boy of Breaking India 2.0 at Harvard Kennedy School, very prestigious place. He openly goes around telling Indian students, you should revolt against your family, he says, because the family is perpetuating abuse and oppression. The family is passing on the oppressiveness of the ancient Vedic tradition into the next generation. If the family weren't there, there would be no transmission to the next generation. So if the one way to dismantle the structures of oppression is to dismantle the family. So this is a very dangerous thing. The point is, reality is, he says that this family structure is a Brahmanical structure, male-dominated, patriarchy, and therefore it is perpetuating that. But there's a very strong family system among Dalits. There's a very strong family system among Muslims, among Christians. I mean, come on, it's all nonsense. To say that, first of all, to say that the family structure is only sacred and only important to Hindus and only to certain castes is a nonsense. And then to say that this family structure teaches you abusiveness because your parents' abusiveness you learn and you pass it on is also nonsense. Because if you break up the families, then they'll be lost. People will not have a psychological bearings. They will not be rooted, and you'll have a kind of people who are out of emotional strength. There'll be emotional chaos, and such people will be easy to manage and manipulate from the outside. People will be able to kind of distort them and make them do weird things, including violence. So I think breaking up the family would destroy a society. It's a good way to destroy a society, because that's the structure that keeps people together, and it's not just in India, it's everywhere, and it's been around for thousands of years. So you cannot pass judgment on such a huge thing and start dismantling it right away. Yet that's what they want to do.
Right. Because so when we see in the Western countries, they all have these family welfare systems. But in India, we don't necessarily have a concept of that. So if the families are breaking and when these welfare systems are not in place, isn't it a very concerning situation?
Yeah, and this welfare system like Social Security is also going bankrupt. So the US experiment of families not looking after their old people and the government having to look after the old people, it remains to be seen how long this kind of a system will last, because it's financially bankrupt. So you cannot, in India, the reason we haven't depended on a very expensive social security system is that the family looks after you and your community looks after you. There are so many other extended family and community kind of resources. So that you cannot dismantle that. For a poor country, overpopulated in India, if you were to dismantle the family resource, then it will create havoc.
Absolutely, sir. That is very, very concerning, because ultimately family governs everything in India.
Yes.
It is a core. And if there's an unbalance and an unrest in it, it not only affects the personal life, but it also affects the business aspect of it.
So that is why they want to break it. That is why it's a Breaking India strategy. Because they've identified the Vedic structures, the rituals, the dharma, those structures. They've identified community, jati structures. They've identified family as a structure. So they've identified the structures that keep the nation together, and they want to break them up.
Time and again, you have mentioned about the concept of Purvapaksha. Can you please elaborate more on that and how important it is?
So the way our traditional society remained competitive is by studying others, by studying competitors. So Adi Shankara championed this thing called Purvapaksha, which means you study the other. And Uttar Paksha is then you give a response to the other. So in a sense, we are doing a Purvapaksha of Harvard, and we're doing a Purvapaksha of wokeism, and we're doing a Purvapaksha of Marxism and the leftism, and giving an Uttar Paksha in this book. That's what we're doing. Now, our ancestors were very competitive because they were always doing this Purvapaksha, like due diligence or competitor analysis on other side. In the Mahabharata, Sri Krishna is doing this he's informing people about the strengths and weaknesses of the opposing side. So he's doing Purvapaksha there. Now, this should have continued, but it stopped at some point in history. So our people have not done this Purvapaksha. I mean, IITs haven't done Purvapaksha on what is Harvard doing to them. They haven't bothered. Some rich people are funding Harvard, and they haven't done Purvapaksha to figure out what are they doing with our money, with our name? Are they dragging us in the mud, which I believe they are, or are they using it in a responsible way? So this business of kind of too much minding my own business and not wanting to look at what you are up to is not a good thing. That it's complacency. You can call it tamas even. It's a kind of not very smart. So the absence of Purvapaksha has made India less competitive. We don't fully understand China. We don't fully understand the West. We don't understand where these threats are coming from. Hence, I got to write this Breaking India 2.0. I hope I don't have to write a 3.0. I'm getting old. I don't have the time to, or maybe not even be around. Indian people need to start doing these things. Government needs to start doing these things.
In a lot of places, Harvard has been mentioned, and what its ideology and methodology is currently. So what is your personal experience?
So my experience with Harvard is 30 years old experience. For 30 years I've had experience. When I started my Infinity Foundation, I gave them grants to talk about Indian philosophy, to talk about, I brought in visiting professors at Harvard. Arvind Sharma was a visiting professor at Harvard Divinity School that was funded by Infinity Foundation. And then Ashok Aklujkar was a visiting professor at the Divinity School in the area of in Indology, in that he taught. And then there was an annual conference on Indology, which is the study of India, funded by Infinity Foundation. They used to bring 60, 70 scholars from around the world, including Pakistan, including Europe, in India, and a lot of Americans, and they would have a 3-day conference, and Infinity Foundation was funding it. So I realized after all of that there was bias. So my bias is not some claim from somewhere else. It is not copy-paste or copying someone else's scholarship. I personally have experience because I used to go there, fund them, and keep an eye on what they're up to. So I used to read all the dissertations that came out of Harvard concerning India, whether it's religion, political science, history, social science, anthropology, all of that I used to read. And I found that there's a huge bias there. And this bias has been going on. It's nothing to do with the Modi government. This bias was there for a long time. It was an inherent bias. So when they say that they're reacting against Hindu nationalism, that's nonsense, because long before Hindu nationalism, they were still doing these things. So I then started complaining, and they didn't like that that this donor is complaining. I was the only donor, Indian donor of Harvard at that time. And I want to repeat this. I was the only Indian donor at Harvard at that time in the humanities, social sciences concerning Indian thought, Indian traditions. And so I started having fights with these guys. On the one hand, I'm donating. On the other hand, I'm arguing with them because, they're taking our money and they're writing against us. That's no good. And they're not even giving our people a chance to talk back. This whole cancel culture, not even allowed to talk back. It bothered me that this is not a level playing field. So I withdrew. And I also noticed that a lot of good things from India, they were copying, plagiarizing, and digesting into American things without attribution. So I pointed out that there were some, Emerson was a great American thinker who acknowledged his debt to the Vedas, to the Indian tradition, the Hindu traditions, and he was a Harvard person, and he resigned from Christianity because of the influence Indian influence on him. And when he did that, Harvard banned him to come because he went to Harvard, gave a speech, and he was very negative towards American culture, and they canceled Emerson. So that cancel culture goes that far. And so when they were celebrating his anniversaries, they were treating him like he's a great guy, product of Harvard. But I wanted them to also show that Harvard was very narrow-minded and double-faced, because when he started criticizing them, they canceled him. But they didn't want to show that part of it. I've also brought to their attention that somebody called Herb Benson, a major figure in Harvard Medical School, was copying transcendental meditation from Maharishi Mahesh Yogi and teaching it there as his own. And he was getting patents, and he was getting a huge amount of funding from the government and from Harvard, and still his institute is quite well regarded. So I would criticize this. I would say that on the one hand, you're trashing my tradition, and on the other hand, you're taking a whole lot of good things without attribution. They were not attributing a lot of stuff they were taking from Ayurveda. They were not attributing it to India. They were not attributing that T.S. Eliot, who was considered one of the most famous poets and writers in American history, he was a Sanskrit scholar at Harvard. And he wrote a lot about his Sanskrit experience. And he wrote how basically Sanskrit got him inspired to write some of his best poems. And in Harvard, he's a big figure, but they never talk about the Indian the Indian debt, the debt to India that T.S. Eliot owed, that he acknowledged. It's not even that I'm finding it out, but T.S. Eliot acknowledged it. But Harvard no longer wants to. So I came up with many examples which are documented in a full chapter in this book, My Experiences at Harvard, where on the one hand, they were negative and I was criticizing them. On the other hand, when Harvard people learned a lot from India, they plagiarized and did not want to acknowledge it, and I wanted Harvard to mention all these things. So that led to a falling apart. So I got out of funding Harvard and turned into more of a critic. Some Indian billionaires filled my space. The vacuum that I left got filled by Indian billionaires because Harvard said, okay, this guy is gone, we'll go to these other billionaires, and they're not very vigilant, they're not doing Purvapaksha, they're just sleeping, and we'll just stroke their ego and we'll get some millions of dollars. So some of them gave $10 million, some of them gave $50 million. So this thing took off, and now it became fashionable for Indian billionaires to put a chair or a department in their name and be very happy about it, their name in front of a building. But what they're funding at Harvard is toxic. They're funding things that are against their own culture, and they ought to look into that. I mean, I'm just offering this as a suggestion. They ought to look into that and see if their name is being misused because they are lovers of India, they are lovers of Indian civilization, and yet that civilization is being attacked by Harvard using their money and their resources. So I've had this huge experience with Harvard before writing this book. I want people to know that this is not a book that you could write without having had decades of experience at Harvard. It's not like enough to do copy-paste and go online and criticize this fellow randomly or that fellow randomly. You have to have had that lived experience that I have had. I would say I have known Harvard longer than any of the students because they haven't been there 30 years. And most of the faculty haven't been there 30 years. And I have had this experience with Harvard over the past 30 years.
So thank you for sharing your personal journey, because it is very important for us to understand all of this. You mentioned about the cancel culture, right? And because we have the youth who is also prone to this sort of culture. Can you please elaborate more on the impact of this on the youngsters?
So cancel culture basically says you ignore and exclude those you don't agree with. And you bring in people who are like you, who feel like you. So it becomes an echo chamber, where you echo each other. And those who are outsiders to your point of view, you just keep them out. And you badmouth them. You call them names and you say that they are bad people, we don't want to listen to them, and complete nonsense like that. So this is cancel culture. And cancel culture comes from this ideology that says that the underdog, the oppressed people, have to now take on the discourse. The discourse was defined by the oppressors, and the oppressors, they forced it on everybody. They came up with a discourse. Now we have to topple the discourse by doing reverse discrimination. We have to discriminate against them and take over the discourse from the oppressed people have to take over the discourse, and therefore they should cancel people who are considered oppressors. Now, why am I considered oppressor? I don't understand. Who have I oppressed there at Harvard? But I'm part of the Hindu elite. So I'm an oppressor just because I was born that way. I'm an oppressor, whether I've done anything wrong or not. Okay, so this is all full of nonsense and full of flaws in the logic. Actually, we are not oppressors, we are oppressed colonially. We were oppressed by the British, and we were before that oppressed by the Muslims. So we've been oppressed for over 1,000 years. And so when they say that the oppressed have the lived experience of what it means to be oppressed, and their lived experience is what should come out, we have the lived experience of being colonized, and which these people don't have. They cannot talk about colonialism because we are the ones who have had the lived experience. So their arguments are full of kind of double talk. If you take their argument and you apply it in the other direction, they won't like it. So basically, it's called bullying. I think Harvard is a bully. They will not allow people who are disagreeing with them, and that's cancel culture.
So thank you for such an enlightening conversation. And it was very, very important for us to know what you have written in this book. I'd recommend everybody to please buy a copy of this book. Please read it, understand what it says, and leave all of your feedback in the comments. We will have a look at it. We will come back and we will have another conversation with Rajiv Malhotra ji. So thank you very much once again for having this conversation.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Everyone who has read at least one chapter of the book, if you want to, in my next trip to India, organize a workshop for those who have done some reading, even one chapter, I'll be happy to come and conduct a workshop and go through, mentor them, teach them how to use these ideas in their own life.
Thank you very much. Hope we get some really good feedback, and there are more youngsters who are willing to join us. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you very much.